Hey everyone, this is Kiki Tobar, and you're listening to Kashmir Talk, your number one podcast for entrepreneurs, small business owners, and growth mindset individuals.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Kashmir Talk. I'm your host, Kiki Tobar, and this is Kashmir Talk, and I have a very special guest today, and she was kind of nervous, but just being kind of weird about it, which is kind of funny because you're the biggest talker in the whole world. This is my very, very, very special guest. She's pretty much my best friend in my whole life. This is my mom. And if you know me and you know me in my life and everything that I do, if you've been in my client and sat in my chair, you've been in my trainings, you've seen me as an educator. I probably talk about my mom and my parents the most inside of my personal life. I probably talk about them more than I talk about my husband, just because, are you cheering up already? Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. This is that type of episode. So first of all, last episode was really amazing, and I'm just really grateful for everyone who reached out about how the episode impacted them, and I knew it was going to get a lot of tears. I knew, like, just the fact that I got emotional. It was hard to put myself out there, but it is a story that I tell a lot of my students, and I tell like my team, but I didn't really haven't ever really gotten super personal about it until this point. And I wasn't even planning on sharing that in the last episode. So I'm just grateful for everyone who reached out and just said that it helped them, because it's just hard. Cause when you see someone in a moment of success, you're like, wow, I don't think I could ever get there. So just offering that moment of vulnerability is just nice. But, I owe a lot of my credit and success to my parents, which is why I wanted to have my mom on the show, because I train so many hairstylists and I train so many business owners inside a business. And the number one thing that they get is that feeling of being felt degraded inside of their industry. And that's one thing that I never felt of in my life as a hairstylist, was feeling like I had a degrading job. Because my parents do own a hair school. If you don't know that already, they own a very successful hair school in Utah. How many students would you say you have? 200? That's usually the number I put around for people, is 200. It
just varies, obviously, because of all the programs and everything we do. So I would say probably max out at 200 at any given time during a year.
Yeah. So it's very career business driven, women in business. It's like the exact opposite of what a lot of my students feel inside of our industry as hairstylists. And I would bet that a lot of people in other industries feel the same way as we do, in a trade skill, something that's artistic, but you're also forced into this power of entrepreneurship. And so it's really hard. But let's back up, because my mom asked, when I asked her to be on the show, she was like, well, what are we going to talk about? And I was like, what do you mean? What are we going to talk about? There's so much to talk about. My mom was an immigrant. She came from the Netherlands. And I want her to tell that part of her story, and just coming over and having to basically she remembers that. She has memories of coming over and having to learn a new language and starting school over. And then fast forward, now she has this super successful life. She has 4 children. She's a power, you're still in business. You're still working. And it's just I look up to that. And I think that I love that how conversational my mom is. And I love, even though she's so successful, she's very relatable, and she makes everyone feel heard, and she listens really well, and she's a conversationalist. And I love that about her. And I wanted to share her with you today. So let's start from the beginning. Let's tell us a little bit about your upbringing inside of Holland. And I mean, she was raised with 9 children in your family. So back then, that wasn't normal, having 9 kids in your family.
I would say in Europe, it's probably a little bit then as it is now in the U.S. So 1 child, maybe 2 in Europe would be a lot. And here we were 9.
9. I remember you telling us as kids, you were the circus.
What,
just
kind of.
Just ripping around on the trolley, unattended, just around Holland, just being
and
crazy
I think
kids.
That came from my mother, who was fearless and, what did I say? what can I say about somebody that like isn't afraid of anything?
Yeah, Oma definitely wasn't afraid of anything. Like we have this thing that we say about Oma. She had this certain walk.
Oh,
and it was like she was
Oma talk, Oma walk. Like it's kind of a joke, but it's like kind of giving her a compliment and saying,
yeah,
when you want to be fierce about something and you feel like you, how do I say it? So I'm really have something to say and I believe in what I believe in and I'm going to convince you of it and I'm going to call the manager. Call the manager.
Always calling the manager.
Call the manager.
She's always calling the manager.
In the store. Call the manager. And we're hiding and like freaking out because Oma's calling the manager.
And we were always intimidated by Oma. It was crazy because she obviously didn't have English as her first language.
Right.
But that did not stop her.
Oh,
she was in that store, like not speaking English perfectly and bossing people around. Like, no, you know, she held people accountable.
Well, and you know, it's like some people can be annoying around that kind of a thing, but she always had like a good argument somehow.
Yeah.
Like she could, whatever came out of her mouth, you're like, whoa, how did she come up with that kind of an argument to say she was right? Like that was on the sale rack. That should be on sale. Like,
yeah.
I wouldn't even thought about that, but kind of right. Like your store messed up. And in some ways you think, well, that's not right because I'm a business owner and I understand how that kind of stuff works. But you have to respect the fact that she had to fight for everything because she had to figure out how to navigate through living through the war, having to like, you know, you can imagine like 14, 15 years old and the Germans, you know, stomp into Amsterdam and her and my dad both. My dad's really probably like, you think he was like the quiet guy, you know?
Uh-huh. You kind of did because he would let her speak. Like when in the two of them in the room, she definitely held the power.
Yeah.
But
he was angry, she was angry, and they were going to fight. And they didn't know how, but they were going to fight. And my dad he went into the underground. Not long after that, he kind of disappeared because at that time you could not, you know, you had to make a decision. You know, the Jewish kids couldn't go to school anymore. That was the first step. And that was his neighborhood. All the kids in his neighborhood were Jewish. He was the only non-Jewish boy in the neighborhood. He lived in a very well-off neighborhood, but his family was not. So he was told, you know, and probably most likely all the young men were going to work like camps to make military items and whatever they needed for the war. And he was not going to do that. So he had to finish his schooling. He loved school. My dad's a very intelligent man. He loved school. He wanted to finish. And he didn't have his school books. And the teacher said, well, go to, you know, the Anne Frank family because they have the school books that you'll need to be able to finish
they had
off
the school books because they weren't allowed to go to school anymore.
Right. So they have the school books. So go to their house, go get the school books, and that will help you finish off your year. So he went to their house, picked up the books, not thinking anything about it because Anne Frank and her family are just like everyone else.
They lived in the neighborhood.
It's before they went into hiding, really. So at that time, you know, everything was still kind of like, you can't go to school, but you can walk the street, and then they started rationing food, and then they started kind of basically like putting them on trains, and they started disappearing. So when he started seeing that happen, he got really angry about the discrimination that was going on, because these were his friends and his family, and his really like because he only had 2 kids in his family, so a lot of his friends, he was very outside, had those influences. So anyway, long story short, he disappeared into the underground, went to live with some families, wrote a book about all his experiences, and at about, he was probably about 17 at this time, 18, he joined the SAS. They came and picked him up on a plane. He went to England and served the rest of the war, jumping out of airplanes and missions
before
and
he was 18 years old.
Yeah. So he had grit. They both have grit, but my mother is very loud about it. So he's just a quiet, like you don't want to mess with him, but she just spoke for him. But We heard so many stories, but we heard all the stories from my mother mostly.
Interesting. You didn't hear them from Opa.
No, he was he's not boastful. He's not prideful.
Mm-hmm.
He just made sure he told his story in the book, and it's very factual. And so that's where we got most of the stories, and then we would ask him questions.
Yeah.
So
He wouldn't really talk about it. I remember when I was a kid, I mean, he would talk about something if you did ask him a question, but do you think that I had this sense that he almost just didn't want to share the story out of like fame, because it was just sad and terrible, and he would only use the story if it were to teach a lesson, because it was that type of thing. Growing up, we heard the stories, and it was specifically to teach a lesson, like, don't ever let this happen again. Like, you always hear the phrase, history repeats itself. But I think as a child, we heard that so much, and we really believed it. And it is true. And it's just crazy. We were even discussing today in the car when we were driving around LA, and just like the past couple of years, how so many things have happened. And this isn't a political podcast, but you see how things can happen just over time, like a little bit. And that's the message that Opa always gave us, was a little bit at a time. They'll take your freedom away, and a little bit here and a little bit there. And then eventually you're not going to have anything left. And then eventually 6 million people have been killed.
And you
so
didn't
it's like,
speak up.
No, and you just didn't speak up. And so we always had this sense of holding integrity. That I remember at a funeral, Opa spoke at a funeral of our cousin once, and his main message was having integrity in yourself. And he was just so big on that. He was so big on just being truthful and speaking your truth and standing up for yourself and having that sense of character.
And being proud of your name.
Yeah.
Which I never thought that much about it back then, but I think now it's like, whoa, Taylor name's a cool name, and it's a cool family, and we need to stick together. And I think he always felt like that, but really don't shame your family.
Yeah. And I think for us to say the story is like, yeah, sure, Kiki, that's an amazing story. That's an amazing story that you guys have. And that makes it so easy for you to have pride in your family and your family name and the things that are happening. But if you don't feel that way about your family or your lineage or your upbringing, I think it's the opportunity to rewrite that script and kind of change it. Like, you can be whoever you want. You can be that one person in your family that changes everything. You can be that one person that decides, like, no, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We're not going to be the family that was raised in poverty. We're not going to be the family that couldn't have whatever they wanted at the grocery store. We're not going to, luckily I wasn't raised in a family like that where, you know, I hear stories like that all the time of we grew up without, we didn't have, like, I don't have those stories. And maybe sometimes it's hard for people to relate to me because they see my success and they see privilege in my success. And it's like, I don't know what else to say, but I did work hard. I don't know if it would have been different if I was raised in a different condition. Yeah. But I do know for a fact that my family and the emphasis that they put on me is why I am where I am today. And I feel that sense of obligation to do with my kids like what you guys did with us.
Yeah, and if you don't have that story and you don't have that past, make your own story.
Yeah.
Make your own legacy. You have your whole life to build. And if it isn't like a family, make it a community. Make it adopt children, like have them be a grandparent to children, be a parent to children, be an aunt, a sister. There's all kinds of opportunities to work with children. And then when they grow up, they become your family. So you have that, you can start to build that family. You have your whole life to live to be able to
mentor.
Yes. Because I look back now and I'm like, what would I have done if I hadn't had a family?
Yeah.
How would I have, like, oh, I'm from this amazing heritage. I'm from this amazing family. So what's my story? You know, so obviously you grow up and it has to be your own story. You have those, you know, memories, but those are things that are just supposed to build you and stepstone you to the next step.
Do you think, this is off topic, but do you think Oma wanted to have 9 children? Did she always talk about that? Like that was something that she wanted? Or?
I think they just really genuinely loved kids.
Yeah.
You know, some people, I don't know, whatever reason people have a lot of children, but they genuinely wanted to be together all the time. And they wanted to like do activities together and like the camping and like we lived in Holland. We'd all pile into a tiny little car and drive to Switzerland for 14 hours in the car. And there's like 3 of us stacked on top of each other and we're singing the whole time. I'm like, this is so, like, I look back now and I think that's like dangerous. It's weird.
It's like a movie.
And kids obviously love that because the energy of that is just like, and then I think, well, my parents could have, like, were they like hippies and weird like that? No, they were actually genuinely loved children.
Yeah, they just love that. I remember you telling stories all the time of when you would be forgotten at church for hours at a time and no one would come. They would forget you were even there. They'd forget that you didn't even get in the car. And then there was this one story that the door accidentally opened when you were driving and one of the kids fell out and rolled down the street.
Well, that would be me, and it happened to me twice.
Oh my God.
So then it was the big joke that, like, I didn't know how to not, like, I was just like messing with the door handle, but I don't know. Is it because there were too many people in the car and the door couldn't shut? And then one time, this was when we very first immigrated. The first time we immigrated twice, but the first time we moved to Florida and my dad had a really good job with IBM. We had lived in a beautiful house with a pool and a golf course and the beach was right there. And it was like this amazing place. And we're so excited and we're going to have a pool and this is going to be like so cool.
Was this when you very first moved to the US? Time. Oh, wow. You guys were like living it up.
And we got dropped off at school, just like my mom, just go, okay, everybody just get out of the car. And just like somebody was standing there to help us find our classroom. And obviously my mom was off doing something else. She had better things to do and just go to school and everybody goes to school and I do something over here. And I remember that first day, it was really weird. And I remember kids looking at me and saying things to me. And I only recognized like a few words. But then I realized that kids don't really have a lot of words. But that day I remember going to the sidewalk and all the buses were gone. And I thought, so I literally just sat on the sidewalk. Like I remember like on the street, kind of like on the sidewalk, and I just sat there and I wasn't even afraid. I just sat there and I sat there for a long time. And Oma finally drove up and picked me up. It was a long time, but I wasn't afraid. I just felt kind of like, oh, well, she'll come eventually, I know I probably missed the bus, but I didn't know how to say in words to anyone that I'd missed the bus. I didn't know. I could tell them my name. I couldn't tell them a phone number or an address or anything. I could just tell them my name, and that was it. So I figured, well, if I say her long enough, she's going to show up at some point.
Yeah. So, a lot of people these days would categorize that as trauma. That's like the buzzword of 2023, I feel like. And
I'm sure there was, and there's like, I've done work where I've realized those are trauma things that I learned from that like somehow it like kind of comes back and creeps back, these little experiences. But I'm like, wow, I got through that just fine. But then later you learn to process, and just say to yourself, okay, well, that was hard. And that was probably not right that my mom left me there and didn't remember, and just saying that wasn't right.
Right.
And then process it and then get over it. And then you remember another little something else, because all these little things happen to us as we grow up. We fall off our bikes. I remember burning my hand on the stove and I had to go to the doctor. She said, well, just go walk over there. And my skin was peeling off. I had a really bad burn. So I went to the doctor and he was like, I remember just like that procedure where he was pulling the like skin off my arm and everything. And I come home and I was so traumatized and almost like, oh, you got it taken care of. It was all good. And I was like, I really didn't like that at all. That wasn't like a good experience for me. So those weird memories sometimes come back to me and I realize that, oh, that was good. That was trauma. And now I need to process it. I need to get through it because I didn't ever think it was traumatizing, but obviously we all have trauma. So that I have to remember those things and then I have to process it and know that they weren't perfect, even though I thought they were perfect. Of course they're not perfect.
Well, in the moment when there's like trauma happening, do you ever think like, this is trauma that's happening to me in this moment? It's like you don't really understand. But the whole point of trauma, which I think people aren't clicking and getting, this is just my personal opinion, but it's like, how are you going to overcome that? How are you going to just, what did you say? Just accept.
Process it.
You processed. You said that happened. You accepted it. And then you moved on. And you're able to just have it be a part of your life. And I wouldn't even say that was like, that made you who you were today. That made you resilient. That made you strong, because in my eyes as your child, I always saw that my mom was really resilient and tolerant and patient. And maybe it was those things that made you that way because your mom was like that. And you know, it's like you, in your own eyes, you look at this trauma as being something negative and bad. But then in maybe other people's eyes, it's like, it's what made you who you are.
But because everybody has trauma, whether it's big trauma or a lot of little traumas or whatever, and like moving to a new country and not learning the language, that's very dramatic. I do remember that being really difficult, but I always tried to see the good in it. But yet again, everybody has it. So find out what those things are and say that was trauma and that was hard. And I think sometimes we don't like to say that our parents did something wrong or they made a mistake. Like, we all make mistakes. And
I think none of us as kids want to say that to our parents. I would never, ever want to say that to you as your child. I think about this all the time. It's like, now that I'm a parent, I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll do something different. But it's never like it's in the past. Why would I just sit there and say, I wish you would have done this or I wish you would have done that? Like, it's who you were. And I think every parent wants to do the best they can and does the best they can with what they have. And that is what it is. You know,
and
you can't.
Because now you're a parent and I'm a parent from that past, I think, okay, now I know I'm not perfect. I know they weren't perfect. I know my kids aren't going to be perfect. So let them work those things out within themselves because that's their lane. That's not my lane to figure out. That's something
I love that you do as a mom and as an in-law and as just a person. Is in all the relationships that you have, you really have stood in this way where it's the lane. It's like, that's their lane, not your lane. And let them have their own life experience. Let them have their own thing. And sure, I can have my opinion, but it's not my lane to put my opinion on them. And it's your lane to love them for who they are and really accept them. And you've done that with in-laws. You've made them feel so accepted. You never feel like, you've never ever felt like with the in-laws that I say in-laws because all of the kids in our family are married. So we have 4 kids in our family and they're all married. So we have a lot of these new relationships that are coming in, grandkids, you know, and stuff. And it's like, that can be hard to navigate. That can be difficult. And I think that we have really done a good job of trying to do the best that we can. And we have, for the most part, a pretty healthy, well-balanced family.
I think it starts with like just no cross-talking, no negative talk about
oh my gosh,
my kids, my in-laws, my grandkids. Would be the hardest lesson I've had to learn is just like just process it within myself. If I feel like something really upset me or bothered me, like that's not for another person to like, I cross-talk that to make me feel better because now I just said it to somebody and then so that's something we've learned in our business a lot with our relationship. So that just having a business has really helped me learn how to navigate those relationships at work because those make your family relationships stronger too because you have to play nice.
It's weird because your family relationships, you can almost tolerate it forever. You can tolerate it for generations of bad behavior and you can sweep it under the rug. But when you work in a workplace with people, you mentor, you're a leader, or you have coworkers, it's almost like it has this short time span and things implode if they're not dealt with. Nothing can be swept under the rug. Nothing can be gossiped about. You almost have to run this really tight ship. And that's something that I've seen you do in your business. And it's crossed over into the home life. You guys always talked about business at home. You and Dad always work on the business together. You even talked about it at dinner. And there were times where I hated that. And I was like, let's just not talk about the freaking hair school right now, you know? And I would like be annoyed. But now I'm like, no, I get it. Like it was healthy. It was good and that you guys had that.
I would say that evolved from, me having to learn all these things I'm talking about now that I'm still working on, right? So, obviously we coach a lot. We work with, we read books as a team. We learn how to. I love
that you guys do that.
So big.
You don't just read books, you read like good books, like emotional books. And the one that you told me about, which everyone listening should read too, is No Bad Parts.
So good.
Which is so good for a team environment to read because you realize, like, going back to trauma, that everybody has it. Everybody's trying to be the parent that they weren't, and everybody's trauma is good. No one has a bad part.
Yeah.
And the second you start to understand that, when you lead a team or you work with people and they start to be difficult and you don't quite get along, it's like you're not going to get along with everybody. And you have to realize that.
And how do you stay in your lane? Because I can say all day long, people are not in their lane, but I need to stay in my lane. And then when I stay in my lane and something needs to be dealt with, and this has been my hardest struggle, is to really have approach people and have those uncomfortable conversations that are productive and that help us stay in our lane. But I have to really confront you now. Like, and
Confrontation
with total trust. And until you start confronting, you can't build trust. So you have to start doing it and practicing it. And then people know, oh, if something were to bother them, they would tell me because I can trust them, because we have open, honest conversations. That's hard for me.
It's hard for me. It's hard for, I think, everyone who's had to have that hard conversation where they get a knot in their stomach. And it's like when you have to let somebody go. Maybe you don't even want to let someone go. You're not going to let somebody go, but you have to have a difficult conversation with them. It's so hard because you never want them to feel like you're disappointed. And that's what, when we were talking at dinner last night, you were telling me that is like so much of the work that you've done with your employees is to, and your team members, is to feel like there's nothing that you could do to make you feel like, what did you say?
To disappoint us.
To disappoint us.
There isn't anything you could do.
And how do you really get that point across? Like how did you get that point across? It was a lot of conversations with your team.
And it's a lot of conversations, meaning ongoing, talking about the path. My husband Jay is really good at setting the framework for all of that so that things don't get
out of
go
control.
too far. We always joke and we talk about, when feathers, bricks, and dump trucks. So you kind of feel feathers, meaning something's starting to bother you about something that's going on, or something's feathers, like,
Like a little thing, and you're like, there's like those leaves falling off the tree, and you're like, I see that. I don't know how I feel about that, but I see it, and there's something there.
I'm going to let it go because I'm one to let that go.
Yeah.
And then I get hit with a brick, like like an employee does a no call, no show, for instance.
And that like affects your,
I should have seen that coming.
Right.
But it's not a dump truck yet because there's going to be a story around it, right? Because I have to give them the benefit of the doubt and say something really bad happened. Like, let's just.
Yeah. The brick is like, it affected me.
What did I not do?
But you can recover from the brick. That's the thing, is you can recover from it. And then a lot of people will be like, no, I'm going to tolerate it. It's fine. And then you might have more feathers inside of there, maybe a few more bricks. And then you get the dump truck.
And once the dump truck hits, you almost can't go back. So
the dump truck is like, no, we're done. Like, it's like the end of a relationship. It's the end of a thing. At least for me, it's like you're in a lawsuit.
But then I have to look at myself and create accountability around that and say, what did I not do?
Exactly.
Instead of, look what they did. And can you believe it? This is awful. I feel so cheated. No. I did something to let that happen.
Well, when you operate a business too, it's so much easier to do the opposite way because you get so much validation in letting a relationship go or like having a difficult conversation because you're the leader. So it's so easy to just go into an environment and get that validation right out of the gate instead of taking personal accountability for something that you did and realizing I played a part in that. There's 3 sides to every story, right?
For sure.
And so it's taking that time to set aside and say, what did I do that caused this to happen and caused that dump truck to hit me in the face?
And why did I not say something? So I had to really learn to look at myself and say,
you didn't know.
What's wrong with me that I can't do a healthy confrontation, have a healthy relationship? And why did I not trust that person that I felt like I could come to them and say, hey, what happened? How can I help? Because what I think for me, what happens is I start to create a judgment around what they did. And instead of just confronting them, find out what happened when the feathers hit, I judged them and thought, well, they don't have it.
Right. But if you were to do that all over again and have that same person in your life and it started all over again, knowing the things that you know now from that experience before, you would do it differently.
Of
you would
course.
handle it differently. It would be a totally different experience. But you did that in that moment because you didn't know any better. You had to learn that about yourself. You had to do that work and figure it out. Why did I receive this way? Why did I talk to them that way? Why did I handle it that way? Half of it was your fault.
Yeah, why was I afraid? What was the fear that held me back from being able to be really vulnerable? Because that's the part that we don't like to expose. Like, I want to be able to be vulnerable with my employees and say, oh, that really hurt my feelings when this happened or this was said. And I don't want you to do anything about it. I just want you to know. And I love you as a person. That's really hard for me.
How do you even end that conversation? I'm genuinely asking. In a moment like that I would say it's maybe a feedback moment, but it's coming from love. It's like, I always have a hard time ending that conversation because everyone has to learn how to have these type of conversations in love relationships and marriage and business.
I think if you can catch it right in the moment, because I've had this conversation where I've had to go back to someone and say, that really hurts my feelings when you talk, like when you say, like, I don't understand why you say that. Instead, when it happened, I should have interrupted and said something. It could be witty, it can be, but I have to tell my truth in the moment before it's even uncomfortable.
Oh,
Quickly.
yeah.
And I don't have to make it uncomfortable for anybody. I just have to say something really small so that they know what I said. And I know what I said, but I didn't take it too far. I didn't make it uncomfortable for anyone. But if you wait too long, it's a whole nother level.
That's when you start to think about it. And then when you think about it way too long, it seems like then it builds up. And then if you bring it up too late, then the person feels uncomfortable
Like, why
because
didn't you say
know
something?
They know you've been like plotting and like thinking about it and brewing about it in the kitchen for like a month, and then they feel embarrassed
because we do that,
right.
And we really can't hide from each other because we understand each other, I think, way more than we think we do. So when you're not vulnerable and you're not honest, people feel it. You don't even have to say it. There's an unspoken language. We have, in our species, we have so much unspoken language that is so powerful that we all know, but we don't address it. We think it's the words, but it's more about how we even walk, talk, look around, how we address them, how we look at them in the eye, how we, like, are you genuine? And that's something I think I can work on too, is just how can I can say the words, but is it really genuine? Or is the way I say the words that's genuine? How slow do I say it? How do I, it's not even, like I said, not the words, but like if you apologize to someone, apology in words is non-apology. Like looking at me in the eye and saying, I am so sorry. Like, I did not intend for that to happen. I take my part. Instead of like, you've seen how people apologize. They just do it like as if it's like walking past something, and an apology is just like, it doesn't even mean anything anymore.
I had a friend tell me, and it always stuck with me, and it's probably bad advice, that when you say I apologize, it's more for business. And when you say I'm sorry, it's more for relationships in personal relationships. And so they were always offended if somebody used the wrong word. Apology, I'm sorry. Apology, I'm sorry. What you're saying is so much more than that. It's so much more than a word. It's not a word. Would you agree that being in the moment, just the act of being present and really being present in that moment and not thinking about anything else and connecting with that person with your eye contact and your just vibes. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
It's that unspoken language.
That is way more important than the choice of words that you choose.
Well, because have you noticed how much women apologize?
All the time.
I was listening to this podcast about how women apologize for everything. I don't know why men don't do it. Women do it. And we need to stop doing it. Because it's just a word, and then it starts to become unmeaningful. And people say it, I think, because they feel nervous. So they go, I'm sorry, I'm late. I'm sorry. Like, you don't have to say the word all the time. People know what you mean, but you just show like a lack of like power when you are always apologizing for something. And men don't do it.
No.
You just don't see them doing it. We do it. It's our lack of like strength and power and what we really are. We just don't, like, we talk ourselves down.
Right, because we do have quite a lot of power, and I think sometimes women know that they do, but they feel uncomfortable in that moment. I have felt that way when I'm in a moment with a bunch of men, and I know if I open my mouth, they're all going to listen to what I have to say, and I will hold back instead of actually opening up my mouth and saying something. I've done that in the past. I don't do that now, but I definitely did that in my 20s because I knew my power. I felt like I was always taught what my power was as a woman, the divine integrity that I have, naturally what I was given, and it was listened to, and it was, just paid attention to, but I almost didn't.
Because women don't talk to each other the way we talk around. When men are in the room, we talk differently. But we really can come together and speak the same language and really build ourselves up and become more powerful because we're equals. And we're all humans. And to put us anywhere above or below is just doesn't even seem right. And you can frame the presence in the room just by the way you say things or not saying things sometimes. Don't say too much. Don't go the apology is a perfect example of something where we really need to slow down and just be intentional about what you're saying and be open and honest about it, and people feel it and they instantly you create a connection because you're genuine and give a rat's if people are going to judge you.
A rat's ass.
I love rats. It's my favorite. I don't give a rat's.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is also helpful. I feel like these are the type of conversations that you and I have all the time. We're always chatting about stuff like this because you and I both have a similar business model. So it's easy to just chat and but a lot of people, I feel so grateful that I have that because it's cool. I can just my parents almost empathize with me. Oh yeah, today we were just fooling around with the lights and my dad's welcome to the club, learning a business. And I'm yep. And we're just joking around. But something that I also want to touch on with you that I admire is your artistic side. And I tell my friends and my clients about this, but I want to really tell them my mom is a true artist. And I think I want to ask you this because I don't know if I've ever asked you this. Do you feel like this has helped you inside of all of the other sides of your life and who you are as a person is expressing yourself artistically that way? Because you didn't get into painting until we were a little older kids. We weren't babies, but
I waited until I went a little crazy. And that's when I decided my brother's an artist. And so he was going to this painting class. And I said, well, why don't I just once a week go and join this class and see if because I've always liked drawing. I always thought had a love for it. But I always felt a little bit I don't have time for that. Oh, it's not, I'm just like a spaz. I don't have time. I don't, I got to clean the floor. There's not going to.
You were always cleaning the floor with bleach.
No.
With the ice cream bucket, with the bleach and a toothbrush. This is what I tell my friends. I'm my mom's coming, which means I have to fill the bucket with bleach and I have to scrub the floors before my mom shows up. Otherwise, if I don't do it, she's going to do it. But these are the things that you were always busy.
It's just not healthy.
Well, you were just always doing stuff like that. You were always just mopping the floor and scrubbing with the toothbrush and doing
painting
everything.
The room.
You were painting. You always painted our rooms different colors every year.
I would have painted the outside of the house.
Oh, I know.
But I couldn't.
You painted the shutters. You painted the door.
Yes, true.
You got new pillows on the couch every season. You always made dinner. You were very domestic. But then there was this moment that happened where you actually, you said, you started to draw.
I started to kind of realize that, hey, wait, maybe I'm a person after I've always wanted to be a mom. I always wanted to have a family, obviously. But you get to a point where you have a little more time, even a little bit, or just have feeling a little overwhelmed with,
You get a breath and you're oh.
And then I started going to painting class and I realized that there's a whole nother world of and I didn't really understand it then. I just was drawn to it and I was just obsessed with it all of a sudden. It's not I wanted to paint every day because I didn't have time and I knew that wasn't my season. I knew it wasn't my time. But later I learned, and this was somebody that really I admired that said, art is the closest you'll get to your essence. more than anything else, art is where your mind can go somewhere and it can disappear for 3 or 4 hours and you don't even know where you were, and you're totally in your most peaceful place.
When you say essence, what do you mean by that? Like your spiritual side, like your spiritual self?
You're way deep inside your core. You have an essence, and that isn't always hard to find. Takes like certain moments we feel it, right? Because we get really, really close to like, whoa, like you know who you are, and you feel really peaceful and a lot of like love and like you feel
Just
nothing can
peace.
touch you. You've got like, it's total peace. And that is what I would call your essence. So we try to get as close to our essence as we can. Obviously we have a life to live. We can't just go and join, go off and live in a far land and sit on the beach and watch the water. But that's kind of the feeling of what an essence is. So what can you do in your daily life to create that where your mind can feel no judgment, like it can feel no sadness or no even time does not matter. What is that thing? And whatever that is, for some people it's music, for some people it's like literally, some people think it's exercise. I believe it. It's something that you would rather do that than do anything else. And if you don't know what it is, you really need to start trying to find something that's creative, artistic, something that's outside of our world. And I think that's why I was drawn to it. So, and something you can even continue to do as you grow older, because as you go through your different seasons of life, you become like, oh, well, I'm not working as much, but who am I? And what is it I want to create? And what is it I want to show to the world or even leave behind? Like I loved quilting, which is kind of weird. And to a lot of people, like, why do you spend so much time like sewing pieces together? Because I can literally look at the fabrics and I can see the beauty in all the colors and like how things move together. It's kind of like some people like doing puzzles.
Yeah.
That's kind of like making a puzzle.
Yeah.
And with art is not as creative as it is, like draw. If I were to draw a face, I would think, oh, there's a million little mathematical equations that I have to solve in this face. I have to figure out where the nose is. I can figure out where I isn't just looking. I have to all these little measurements. So it's still very difficult. I don't just start painting and it's like, oh, I'm just throwing paint on the wall. That's that could be fun. But this is like, I'm accomplishing something that somebody's going to look at and go, wow, how did you do that?
And then you get that confidence.
And myself, like, how did I do? I did that. Like, how did I, because I followed the steps. I did it the way I was supposed to. Time just 3 or 4 hours went by and all I did was focus on this.
Would you say it's like riding a bike where if you haven't done it for a little while, let's say like 2 or 3 months, and then you come back to it, does it take a moment for you to get back into it?
It actually takes every single time I go into my painting, or especially with portraits, because they're really, really difficult. Because my eye, when you first sit down and look at it, your eye can't see what it's supposed to. So I have to do some exercises. So like say I'm a singer, I have to exercise my voice. In this, I have to exercise and start drawing like, I start with Disney characters. So I start drawing a Disney character. I have a book that's 101 Disney characters, and I start drawing them. And then I'm like, oh, lines. It's all lines and one line to another little inside line that has another line that has a measurement. So when I do that, then my eye starts going, oh, because a face is just a bunch of like dimensions, because it's all dimensions. So then I start, and then it helps me and I can work faster.
Yeah. And then you can kind of get into it and start creating that outlet after the fact. How often I feel like you paint and do art way more than you used to.
I do it a lot.
Yeah. Now you have like this little room.
And I take art classes from people. I always say like, and I've always feel this way, like surround yourself with people that are better than you. So if it's in your business, like I wouldn't have had a hair school unless I had my husband, Jay, I had my director, Mandy. This had to be a threefold mission. It had to come from all three of us, or I would have just, there's no way.
So how did you guys come up with the idea? Because I've heard the story of, is the reason why you came up with the hair school because Erica, my older sister, wanted to go to hair school? Was that the main reason? Or did you feel a sense of this before that moment happened? Like, I'm going to do something that's going to be pretty impactful, because I would say what you've done has impacted thousands of women with children, and the daycare that you put in there. And remember the one time that the drug rehab people came in and went to hair school? Like when I was in hair school, I feel like you've impacted a lot of people. Yeah. So did you ever think and know that that was going to happen before it happened? Did you ever foresee something like this?
I think you just have to create like a vision around your goals. Like, what is it I want to do? What is it, that I want to be? Who do I want to be around? Because you become the people that you're around. You can say all day long that like, no, I'm there. No, you become those people. So if you want to change your circumstances, you've got to start being either around letting some people go, or you start becoming a little more open to people that are better than us are a little scary. Mm-hmm. I think they're kind of scary. Like, oh,
you guys scared the shit out of me when I was a teenager.
Like, you're more successful than me.
Yeah.
Like,
seriously, it's like, it's scary to be around people like that. It's not fun or easy. And then as more successful you get, you build the confidence, it's fun, more fun, but then even still, then you meet the next person.
That's right.
And then that's scary.
There's always somebody that's like, oh, when I meet somebody that owns like 10 hair schools and is really successful and has a huge salon attached, I'm like, I'm scared to even ask questions. Like, I feel really like, why didn't I do that? Like, instead of being curious, I become afraid.
Interesting.
And asking questions instead of like, oh, right. I don't want to, or thinking, oh, well, making excuses or for why I don't want to do that.
But I bet you if you did ask those questions to that person, they would totally, 9 times out of 10, they would take that time to talk to you because they were once where you were. But it's like getting over that fear of opening up and just asking is like so difficult for most people. The mentality of it is just like they can't get over it. They can't ask for help. They can't reach out or even just be a little curious, like what you're saying. And
I just can't imagine anything more scary than not being able to have people help me.
Yeah.
I can't imagine like thinking, I've got this and I know how to move to the next level. I know how to do this. Like, nobody knows how to do a business that hasn't been done the way you've done it. Mm-hmm. Nobody really says they know, because they're always going to come up against like little things are going to come up. You're going to always have little challenges all the time. So I want to know that I can pick up the phone and I can call another school owner and I can say, hey, how have you dealt with this? Mm-hmm. Or somebody comes and transfers to my school, I call them or I message them and say, hey, I've got this person that's looking, why do you think they're transferring to my school? What's really going on? And they get the real story, like get the whole story around. But I feel like I can message the others, which are like, they're right within a mile of me. They're my competition. And I may or may not hang out with them or whatever, but I know we can trust each other to say, hey, what do you think about this person? Or like, how would you handle this? Or like, let's work something out so I can make them feel good about like, I don't want the student to have to come and lose money and not finish out at your school. And maybe there's some fears around it or whatever. And I just had that conversation with somebody this week and I really felt really comfortable around like, I'm really glad I can, message her and say, hey, what do you think? And I don't know, maybe that's just me being bold and regressive because maybe they don't want to talk to me, but I do feel like I can trust them.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's something that I have learned from you is like, even in the past relationships of bosses or owners or people that have mentored me, I might not work for them anymore. I might not be in their life anymore, but just keeping that door open and keeping that respect open is just something that's carried me very well. And to know, like, even if we don't work together in the future or we end this relationship, like, that's okay. Everybody has a time and a season or whatever, and that's completely fine. Nobody did anything wrong. You don't have to be besties for your whole life.
No, I think and I don't think it's snobbish to say to yourself, I'm not going to spend time with people I can't like learn from. Good people you can always learn something from them, but it's easier to hang out with people that aren't in that space where you feel like, oh, I'm just don't quite measure up. Because nobody wants to feel that way.
No, nobody wants to feel like that.
You want to feel like you're on top of it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that as a business owner too. I've been very curious around my staff, and Jay and I have let them make decisions in their areas, and we've respected their decisions. And then sometimes things don't work out for them with the decision they made, and then they learn and I learn, and we can talk about it, and then they take ownership and accountability because they were the ones able to make those decisions. Mm-hmm. And I love that because, number one, I can back off and I don't have to worry about their fear around me, like, okay, now I want you to tell the students this and I want you to do it like this. And they're going to go, wait, I thought I was a director and I could, everybody wants to feel like they can take ownership in a good way too. So everybody has to fail too. So it's okay if you don't do your job perfectly, but we reassess it and we come back to it and then we have a better conversation.
But that's all that it is like leading where you are as an owner and not necessarily being like the boss,
It's better. It's easier that way.
It's so much easier. And it's like once you realize that you can let your team do what they do and have their wins and their little things and have their own successes and everything, that's when your business really can thrive, and you just have to learn to let go.
And you can always make more money. I mean, you're never going to say, oh, I've maxed out on whatever I can do. You can work your guts out and be at your business 24/7 and work, and then what's that all about? Mm-hmm. Or do you want to...
At the end of the day, if you can actually build somebody else up and you can be like...
And stand back and say, wow, they're doing the best they can. They're doing a good job. We talk about it. We obviously we have meetings around all of that, but I can take off for a month and everything will just run unless there's a fire.
That's like incredible that she's been able to do that. Like my dad's in the corner of the room, like shaking his head, like, yeah, you know how freaking hard that is? You know how hard that is? That's like one of the hardest things that most people cannot learn how to do is leave for an entire month, and it can operate smoothly. Yeah. Sure, you're a phone call away, but more of that and most of that has come from you instilling trust and confidence inside of your team to allow them to do the job and allow them to handle those systems and processes that have been set in place in order for that to run smoothly. And it's all built around you not having the ego, you not wanting to lead from the front and not caring about the
trip, we call it like tripping over dollars to pick up pennies. Right. It's like, okay, why am I spending all this time to make maybe another 10% in my business? Mm-hmm. So, okay, so what? Like I have my time now that you can't buy. You can't buy my time. I'd be so miserable if I was at my business every day. I've done it already. I've built it. I love the energy because I feel like people there thrive. We have over 40 employees now. It's a lot. Sometimes I don't know all of their names, but I'm okay with that too. Mm-hmm. I have people that have hired them. I have people that have managed them. And then when feathers turn into bricks, then we go there, but they manage the feathers.
Mm-hmm. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's a good way to end it.
Yeah.
So find someone else to manage the feathers.
Oh my gosh.
And then you can handle the bricks and dump trucks, but maybe the bricks and dump trucks should never happen. So finding ways to always, eventually sometimes they happen no matter what in certain cases. But
I think the feathers has been my biggest lesson. Mm-hmm. And what I love too is when we learned that and read the books, we have the same language. So when we talk as a staff, we say, oh, feathers. They're like, oh.
Well, because everyone today calls red flags, but in our family we call it feathers. So this is going to be the name of this podcast. I'm going to name it Feathers, Bricks, and Dump Trucks, and then everyone's going to have to figure out what that means. But I feel like that's a good way to end it. I feel like you and I could talk for another hour probably about this because, like I said, we talk about this all the time. Just in our personal life, we're always talking about business. So if you want my mom on the show again, definitely. Let us know how you liked this. Next time, we're going to have to force her to come back into town so that we can do this again. She has to come in every 6 weeks because she gets her extensions done. So we'll have her on the show again. But that's it for today. If you guys want to listen to us on Spotify, you can watch the video or on YouTube. And then we're also on Apple. If you want to know more about my business and what I do, you can follow us at cashmereextensions.com. And then follow our Instagram for the show. It's Kashmir Talk Show. And yeah, that's it for now. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.